Welcome back to Finance Uncut. On today's episode, the New World Order is coming. So I did this video last week, The Economy is Finished, where Jerome Powell himself says that, well, the economy is finished. The economy that we knew it before the cough is finished, and that we are going to a new normal. Have you heard that term? New normal. And our global leaders using that term, build back better. We're going to build back better. But what are they going to build back better to? What is the new normal going to look like? If the economy that we've known throughout the past, the economy, the life that we grew up, is done, is finished, then what is the life? What is the economy? What is their new normal going to look like? And that's what we're going to explore in this. But before we do, let's just have a reminder of what J. Powell had to say.
Remember, we're not going back to the same economy. This will be a different economy.
We can see that the pandemic has changed our economy in some important ways. Only time will tell how lasting these changes will be. But I think we know that we're not simply going back to the economy we had before the pandemic, but it'll take time to see exactly what the changes will be. And we know that at the Fed, we need to watch carefully as the economy continues to get through the pandemic and try to understand the ways that the economy has changed and what the implications are for our policy.
Okay, so J. Powell says that we're not going back to the old economy. Now, have a look at this. WHO Director Mr. Tedros and Klaus Schwab, the World Economic Forum founder, are also saying the same thing.
I want to be straight with you. There will be no return to the old normal for the foreseeable future. I repeat, there will be no return to the old normal for the foreseeable future.
So people assume we are just going back to the good old world which we had, and everything will be normal again in how we are used to normal, in the old fashion. This is, let's say, fiction. It will not happen.
The World Economic Forum and UN signed Strategic Partnership Framework. So after the World Economic Forum and the United Nations signed this partnership framework, Klaus Schwab had this to say: meeting the Sustainable Development Goals is essential for the future of humanity. The World Economic Forum is committed to supporting this effort and working with the United Nations to build a more prosperous and equitable future. And then UN Secretary General, and I recommend you guys, if you don't know him, go have a look at his background. He's practically a communist. The new Strategic Partnership Framework between the United Nations and the World Economic Forum has great potential to advance our efforts on key global challenges and opportunities, from climate change, health and education, to gender equality, digital cooperation and financing for sustainable development. Rooted in UN norms and values, what his communist norms and values, the framework underscores the invaluable role of the private sector in this work. Or are we talking about fascism here? Anyway, and points the way toward action to generate shared prosperity on a healthy planet while leaving no one behind. Sounds great, doesn't it? So if we're not going back to the old ways, the old economy, the economy that we grew up in, well, what is the new economy going to be? What is the new future going to be? Well, once again, I've done a video on this where I've outlaid using some of the work that George Gammon's done, where we paint a picture of exactly what their plan is, what their dream society that they want to create is. And so if you're unaware of that, I'll put a link in the description. Watch the video and you'll have a much better understanding on the future that these people want to create.
And so you're asking, understandably, what's the connection to Klaus Schwab? Finally, come on. Well, here it is. Archbishop Camara, Council Father, one of the authors of Gaudium et Spes, revolutionary personality who's responsible for the Catacombs Pact. He's got one more point on his resume. He was a major influence on a young Klaus Schwab.
I give you one example which for me was probably a crucial moment in my life. I traveled for the first time to Brazil. I met a priest who was known at that time as the priest of the poor people. His name was Don Elder Camara. And he brought me to the favelas of Recife, and I was so shocked. And I said, I have to invite this bishop to Davos to tell the people what poverty is. So I invited him to the annual meeting in Davos. But then when I came back in Switzerland, I found out that actually he was forbidden at that time to speak in Switzerland because he was considered to be a communist. And I said, this is for me a test. But then I noticed that many companies told me, if you invite this person who is so much against business, we will not come to Davos anymore. And that's where I had to stand to my values. Yeah. Even at the risk that I would have to give up the World Economic Forum.
Wow.
But it went very well. I have to say, the audience in Davos listened to him.
So what we're talking about here is one of the council fathers and a speaker at Davos. The guys who are setting up the World Economic Forum, the Great Reset, and the New World Order. He was one of them, ladies and gentlemen.
And they also vowed to put pressure on international organizations to help change the economic structures which they said exploit the poor. These are all points that are remarkably similar to Pope Francis's agenda for the church today.
It's the same revolution. It's the same players, in fact. The Great Reset was indeed hatched in a catacomb beneath the streets of Rome at the close of the Second Vatican Council in 1965. And it just took a while to get to the point politically where it is now. But it's the same movement.
I met a priest who was known at that time as the priest of the poor people. His name was Don Elder Camara.
One of the most profound moments in the life of Klaus Schwab was his meeting with the leader of the Catacombs Pact, celebrated in Rome, not only at the time, but during the Amazon Synod in 2019, when, by the way, the pagan idols of Pachamama were processed into the holiest place in Christendom, the holiest place of pilgrimage in Christendom, St. Peter's Basilica. The abomination of desolation was set up at that moment. And a few months later, all the churches in the world would be locked down and lock their doors. And we still haven't recovered from that. Now, once we realize what these connections mean, once we realize that there really is no separation of church and state, that the global superstate needed to sort of take the Catholic Church, the moral authority of the church, over, infiltrate the church in order to make this happen. Once we realize how long they've been working on this and what it all means, it actually becomes a lot easier to do what we need to do. We get to see what's going on, and it becomes easy to recognize our duty as faithful Christians. We have no choice, friends. I've been saying this for a long time, but I hope this connection helps us all see it. We have no choice but to resist these infiltrators. We need to spread the word. Vatican II, the Great Reset, the Novus Ordo, which means new order. New world order in the church, new world order in the world. It's the same. They had to get rid of Christ the King. They had to get rid of the traditional teachings of the church on marriage and abortion and contraception. You see, it's all connected. It's all part of the same exact revolution against the kingship of Jesus Christ. Do you see why? Why we're talking about proclaiming that kingship? Because that is the answer to everything that's going on in the church, in the state, in the reset, in the New World Order, with COVID, with forced vaccinations, all of it. All of it. Bring the king back to fight this war. You see why Francis was chosen to replace Benedict? Whatever happened to Benedict? What was that all about? The guy that brought back the traditional Latin Mass gets kicked out. He gets replaced by a South American Jesuit hippie Pope, Bergoglio. And one of the first things he does is bring the catacombs pact back. And now he's trying to outlaw the traditional Latin Mass that Benedict brought back to the church, I should say. Why, are you confused about what's going on here? This is why Francis is a champion of the New World Order. He's a champion of climate change, the climate change religion, more than he is a champion of the Catholic religion, which he is burying every day.
I'll put a link in the description where you can watch the whole video and get the whole picture on the connection between the Pope, the Catholic Church, and Klaus Schwab and the Great Reset, this New World Order that apparently all of our political leaders, central bankers, are all in bed with. The United Nations, all the big global institutions are all in bed with. And what's also interesting is, and I've felt this for some time, and I've researched it, researched and read a lot of books from a lot of scientists about the whole global warming, climate change, climate crisis, they're calling it now, is the latest thing. And it is a religion. It's about worshipping the creation, not the creator. Worshipping the planet, not the person who created the planet. And I know many of yous listening aren't Christians. In fact, this channel has got people of all sorts of faiths and non-faiths. And I've come to this conclusion from my economic analysis, looking at the macro, looking at what central banks are doing, looking at where things are going and how to position my portfolio. And it's come to this conclusion that we are seeing, I think, some very prophetic things starting to happen and move. And this movement of government and economic powers combining, the combination of state, government, and the church. When we look at the economic and the government merging or coming together, we can have a look at Revelation 17 and 18.
So the first one of these economic signs of the times is globalism as a precursor to the universal Sunday law. We discussed yesterday briefly this idea of a universal Sunday law. Generally, when we talk about a Sunday law, and this is particularly the case for us here in the United States, when we say the Sunday law, we assume it is an American law. Isn't that true? In fact, most Adventists around the world, because I've done a fair bit of speaking internationally, everybody talks about the National Sunday Law, and everyone's eyes are fixated on America. And that's because of Revelation chapter 13, the beast with two horns, speaking as a dragon. Yes, we know that. But we know that the final events is going to engulf the whole world. It's not just going to be this country. And there are statements, which we're going to look at in a moment, that show us clearly that the Sunday law eventually goes around the world. How does that happen? And relating also to our talk yesterday, that's when we move into the severe phase of the Sunday law. But how do and what's this globalism thing? So let's take a look at the Bible. Revelation 18, verse 3. It says, the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies. So it's talking about global political powers and global economic powers joining up with Babylon the harlot. So there's a global movement. It's not just in one country. Revelation chapter 17, verse 12 and 13, it talks about the 10 horns. And I know I'm not going to get into all the weeds with Revelation chapter 17, but it's the beast with 7 heads, 10 horns, on which the harlot rides. And the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. These have one mind and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. So Revelation chapter 17 paints a picture, 10 kings. The number 10 also represents a global type of feeling, right? A collection of kings around the world. They're going to lend their power to the beast for 1 hour. That sounds like globalism. And I have to interject this, a bit tongue-in-cheek. When we preach about Daniel chapter 2 and the toes of the image, you know this, you know what I'm talking about, the iron mixed with clay. Don't we always say, the kingdoms will never come together, they will never unite? Technicality, okay? Mild technicality. I'm not throwing all of our evangelists under the bus. I've preached that myself. Revelation chapter 17 actually tells us there actually will be a short time at the very end in which the 10 kings do unify. Okay? They do unify when the whole world wanders after the beast. That's a globalist type of movement. Let's continue. Revelation 13, verse 14, saying to them that dwell on the earth, that they should make an image to the beast. Okay? It's a worldwide type of language. Revelation 13, 16, and 17. And he causes all, everywhere in the world, both small and great, poor, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. Again, it is a global coalition that enables a universal Sunday law around the world. Let's see what the Spirit of Prophecy has to say about this. Last Day Events, page 135. Foreign nations will follow the example of the United States. Though she leads out, yet the same crisis will come upon our people in all parts of the world. There it is. It's not just in the United States, other countries. And this next statement in Testimonies for the Church, volume 5, page 212, is interesting to me. Notice what it says. The decree has been passed by the highest earthly authority, that they shall worship the beast and receive his mark under pain of persecution and death. May God help his people now, for what can they do in such a fearful conflict without his assistance? What is the highest earthly authority? If we are to think about it today, I would think maybe it's the United States government. But in light of what we have discussed, if this is going to be an authority that has global authority, which is what we're talking about here, it may be yet to be seen what exactly that authority is. But if I may surmise a little bit, sounds like a transnational entity that has authority across borders and across sovereign nations. Why I say that is going to be relevant in just a moment. But to summarize what we've looked at so far, one of the economic signs of the times is that the political and economic powers of the world will unite in the end times, and it is the centralization of power that enables the globally coordinated Sunday legislation and resulting sanctions upon God's people. But let's take a look at what the merchants of the world today are actually saying, shall we? Klaus Schwab, the director of the World Economic Forum, wrote this last year at the peak of the pandemic in June of 2020. He says, to achieve a better outcome, the world must act jointly and swiftly to revamp all aspects of our societies and economies, from education to social contracts and working conditions. Every country, from the United States to China, must participate. And every industry, from oil and gas to tech, must be transformed. In short, we need a great reset of capitalism. This sounds a little bit like the kings of the earth and the merchants of the earth banding together, doesn't it? But of course, not to be outdone, Pope Francis has a word to say about this topic. In a speech to the Pontifical Academy, his speech is entitled Nation State, interesting title. He says this, and this was, I believe, also last year or the year before. Don't quote me on that, but there is a link there if you want to look it up. The nation state cannot be considered as an absolute, as an island in relation to its surroundings. In the current situation of globalism, not only of economy, but also of technological and cultural exchanges, the nation state is no longer able to procure by itself the common good for its population. The common good has become global, and nations must associate for their own benefit. What kind of association does the Pope suggest? Notice what he says. When a supranational common good is clearly identified, there is need for a special, legally constituted authority capable of facilitating its implementation. Notice, remember, Sister White's counsel, the highest authority in the world makes the decree about the final punishment in the Mark of the Beast crisis. And what does the Pope suggest? And notice he says, think of the great contemporary challenges of climate change, new slavery, and peace. Remember those, particularly climate change. We'll come back to that. Continuing in the same speech, he says, while according to the principle of subsidiarity, individual nations must be given the power to operate as far as they can reach, on the other hand, groups of neighboring nations, as is already the case, can strengthen their cooperation by, notice carefully, attributing the exercise of certain functions and services to intergovernmental institutions that manage their common interests. What is the Pope saying? The Pope is advancing the notion that nation states should outsource key aspects of the administration of some of their core functions for the benefit of the population to, quote unquote, intergovernmental institutions that presumably sit outside and above the individual nations. I don't know about you, but this sounds a whole lot like Revelation chapter 17 and 18 to me. Collections of economic powers and political powers fornicating themselves with an intergovernmental agency that somehow has the moral authority to say what is the common good for all nations. Sister White writes in Bible Commentary, Volume 7, page 977, human enactments and laws manufactured by satanic agencies under a plea of goodness and restriction of evil will be exalted, while God's holy commandments are despised and trampled underfoot. And all who prove their loyalty by obedience to the law of Jehovah must be prepared to be arrested, to be brought before councils that have not for their standard the high and holy law of God. We should be prepared that the movements to set the stage, to put the dominoes in place for the final crisis, are all going to be done under the guise of positive change, for goodness, for morality, for restriction of evil. That's what we read, and that's precisely what we see happening in the world right now. Number 2, natural disasters create economic and political consequences. Maranatha, page 176. As men depart further and further from God, Satan is permitted to have power over the children of disobedience. He hurls destruction among men. There is calamity by land and sea. Property and life are destroyed by fire and flood. Have we heard about wildfires recently? My family, on both sides, my wife and my parents live in California. We hear about fires all the time. What about flooding? Hurricanes, flooding, yes, all the time. Satan resolves to charge this upon those who refuse to bow to the idol which he has set up. His agents point to Seventh-day Adventists as the cause of the trouble. These people stand out in defiance of law, they say. They desecrate Sunday. Were they compelled to obey the law for Sunday observance, there will be a cessation of these terrible judgments. When Sister White talks about natural disasters, we can just sort of substitute that, because we have another term for that in our modern-day vernacular, don't we? It's called climate change. It's the term. It's just another thing, another term to say the same thing. And when we look at this, property and life are destroyed, massive destruction, we understand there will be economic consequences. You remember there was that ship that got stuck in the Suez Canal not long ago. Something like 12% of global trade was brought to a halt because of that one ship getting stuck in that one channel. One canal. Imagine if whole cities are wiped out, whole trade routes are rendered unusable, supply chains are being completely crippled. We're beginning to see a little bit of that because of COVID and things of that nature. But the more relevant point I want to bring out is that based on this statement, these natural disasters lead to legislation. It leads to political action. Continuing. Last events, page 111. The end is near, and every city is to be turned upside down. There'll be confusion in every city. Everything that can be shaken is to be shaken, and we do not know what will come next. The judgments will be according to the wickedness of the people and the light of truth that they have had. Oh, that God's people had a sense of the impending destruction of thousands of cities now almost given to idolatry. The time is near when large cities will be swept away, and all should be warned of these coming judgments. This level of destruction, you think it's going to have some economic ramifications? Yes. But more than that, if we know one thing is that the way to get legislators and politicians to actually take things seriously is when there's economic trouble. When people's pocketbooks are affected, all of a sudden things can happen quite quickly. That's the case. People are going to start looking for answers. And again, Pope Francis, ready to stand in the gap, he has something to say about this. In a speech on Earth Day just this year in April 2021, he says, both the global catastrophes, COVID, and climate change prove that we do not have time to wait. Francis said in a pre-recorded video for Earth Day Live, time urges us, and as COVID-19 demonstrated, we do have the tools to face the loss. We have the instruments. This is the moment to act. We are at the edge. And what are the tools that he's proposing? He already talked about in the previous speech we read, the globalization of the world powers under this external intergovernmental power. Things are pointing the same direction. So that's sign number 2.
And coming in from the Washington Post, Pope, use pandemic to give the environment a vital rest. And don't forget, he's got that COP meeting coming up with the World Economic Forum and all the global leaders. And coming in from Tomorrow's World, you can see the date, 23rd of July, 2021, so not too long ago. The Pope, Environment, and Sunday Law. And in it, it says the idea is to begin with Catholic churches and organizations and then bring in other churches and organizations, ultimately involving the whole world. Integral to the plan is a mandatory weekly day of rest. The Pope's encyclical calls for Sunday to be implemented as a weekly day of rest to save the environment. And I'll put a link in the description below. You can read the Pope's encyclical calls there.
Sign number 3. Inflation. Have anyone heard of the word inflation recently in the news? Sister White has something to say about this, believe it or not. Maranatha, page 181. The Lord has shown me that some of his children would fear when they see the price of food rising, and they would buy food and lay it by for the time of trouble. Then in the time of need, I saw them go to their food and look at it, and it had bred worms and was full of living creatures and not fit for use. Now, the main point of this statement really is to say what we discussed earlier. God will provide for us in the time of trouble. We don't need to fear. So it's a positive statement. But at the beginning, she mentions, incidentally, the condition of the world before the time of trouble. And it says the price of food is rising, and it's rising at such a rate that even some of God's children panic and feel the need to stockpile. You see where I'm getting this from the statement. That's talking about inflation. Well, let's take a look at a few headlines in the past 2 months. All of these headlines are from April and May and June of this year. Consumer prices jumped 5% in May, fastest pace since the summer of 2008. Lumber prices are up 232% and could spiral out of control in the next few months. As corn prices rise, food costs could follow. As copper hits a decade high, traders share what the knock-on effect could be for the economy. Global food prices surge to their highest level in a decade. And the last one, I have a 3-month-old baby. You know this one caught my attention. Millions of Americans are about to get hit with a diaper sticker shock. We better stock up on diapers in our house, maybe. And yes, I understand some of these things might be transient. A lot of economists are saying this is temporary, it's transitory, it's transient. Maybe so. These are some of the exact numbers. The CPI, standing for the Consumer Price Index, rose to 5% for the previous 12 months in May. That's the highest since 2008. And just for reference, the Federal Reserve tried to target the inflation rate to be 2%. We're more than double that now. Gasoline was up almost 50%. I don't think I need to tell you that. You've been to the gas pump recently. Natural gas is up 12%. Used cars, I know someone mentioned this the other day when we talked about cars, up 21%. Copper up 27%. Lumber up 232%. Corn is up 50%. Diapers is up almost 9%. And food globally is up 40%. Historically, the annual rate of inflation in the United States for the past century or so is around 3.25%. James 5 tells us, "Go to now, you rich men, weep and howl for your miseries that shall come upon you. Your riches are corrupted, and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver is cankered, and the rust of them shall be a witness against you, and shall eat your flesh as it were fire. Ye have heaped treasure together for the last days." Simply put, money will lose its value at the end times. That's what the Bible tells us. And inflation is one sure way to make that happen.
So I've done videos with Professor Richard Werner, who is called for hyperinflation in 2023. I've also done videos where Dr. Michael Burry, who is from the Big Short fame, has also predicted hyperinflation in 2023. Recently, I did a video with John Williams from Shadow Stats, who also is now saying that hyperinflation is coming. And Dr. Mark Faber, who's also predicting significant inflation and very hard times ahead for the economy. He's talked about as Dr. Doom. Dr. Faber also said that inflation cannot be stopped. Todd Bubba Horwitz says that the July CPI numbers points to hyperinflation, not peak inflation at 5.4%. So he's not calling for transitory inflation. He says we're heading for hyperinflation as well. And one of my favorite videos of the year was a video George Gammon did with Joseph Wang, who is a former senior trader for the Fed. And so he understands the plumbing completely. And he really destroys the deflationists in this video. So if you really want to this is probably the best video that will educate you on exactly how the plumbing, how the Fed works, how the repo market works, the reverse repo market, what all that means, because there's so much noise out there from some pretty smart people, but also from some other experts. And this guy just completely destroys it. I have ordered that book, by the way, Central Banking 101. So I'll let you guys know what that's like. But let's just cut to a clip and listen to Joseph Wang.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think I need to even get more nuanced in my thinking and not just separate because I was separating the financial economy with the real economy. And then I started separating the non-banks with the actual banks. But I've got to take it a step further and subdivide the non-banks into accounts of over 250 and under 250, so you're getting a better idea of the amount of dollars that actually have the potential to circulate in the real economy with a significant amount of velocity. And then you overlay the supply side, or the supply disruptions, if we're going to have more supply, if we're going to have less supply due to taxes, government regulation, et cetera. And then you can start figuring out, okay, what is the CPI most likely, or the real CPI, not the cooked numbers that we get from the government, but what's the price of the stuff that normal people buy daily? What is the probability that those increase over the next year, 2 years, 5 years, et cetera? That's really helpful for me.
No, I agree. That's how I look at it. I think it's highly inflationary what's happening now, but I guess we'll see. I mean, we have a lot of people on the other side of that, but I guess we'll find out.
I'd like to get your take on if you think the Fed can ever reverse course. I mean, we talk about QE, but do you think we'll ever get to a point where the Fed can actually reduce their balance sheet? Or maybe a better question would be, do you think we'll get to a point where the Fed won't have to increase their balance sheet at an exponential rate?
Exponential. I think it really depends on what the Treasury is doing, right? So one of the things that the Fed does is that it kind of takes away interest rate risk from the market. So you have all these treasuries outstanding, right? The thing about treasuries, especially if you have like a 10-year or a 30-year, their value fluctuates with the market, sometimes significantly. And you have all these, you're telling everyone that treasuries are safe assets, you got to hold them. The banks got to hold them, the pension funds got to hold them, retirement accounts got to hold them. And so that's fine as long as the treasury values don't fluctuate a lot, right? But if you start having a big, let's say, an inflationary boom where people are selling treasuries, then that's a lot of market value that disappears. You know, it'll crash the treasury market. And I think that's really difficult socially to accept because so many people hold treasuries as safe assets. And so I think the Fed will kind of have to keep that in mind if they ever want to shrink the balance sheet. Because when you shrink the balance sheet, you basically making treasury prices go lower, and treasuries are a foundation of the financial system. In a sense, like you mentioned, they're collateral for a lot of things. And when you either raise rates or shrink the balance sheet, then you're kind of making that collateral value shrink, and you're taking money out of the financial system, and that could be very destabilizing. I don't think the Fed can realistically shrink their balance sheet. Maybe if the Treasury stops borrowing so much, maybe, but we're not really on that trajectory.
So there you go. You heard it directly from the Fed guy, Joseph Wang, who understands how the system works better than anyone else. And he doesn't think that the Fed are going to be able to reverse their balance sheet, unwind their balance sheet, and he thinks it's obviously highly inflationary with what's going on. And to be honest, when I look at different religious or Christian denominations, all of them interpret prophecy as having inflation, very high inflation in the end times. So let's have a look at the next economic indicator of end times.
Final economic sign I want to share today: severe wealth inequality creates societal unrest. In the book Education, page 228, it says, at the same time anarchy is seeking to sweep away all law, not only divine but human, the centralization of wealth and power, the vast combinations for the enriching of the few at the expense of the many, the combinations of the poorer classes for the defense of their interests and claims, the spirit of unrest, of riot and bloodshed, the worldwide dissemination of the same teachings that led to the French Revolution, all are tending to involve the whole world in a struggle similar to that which convulsed France. Do we see wealth inequality? And also, what is interesting is that the spirit of prophecy blends this class warfare dynamic with the ideology that led to the French Revolution. There is a correlation between these things, we're told, in the spirit of prophecy. That somehow the atheistic ideology, and we read about the beast from the bottomless pit in Revelation chapter 11, referring to the French Revolution. That atheistic ideology somehow married together and blended with this class warfare, this unrest between the wealthy and the poor, is going to be something to expect at the end of time. I don't have the quote in here, but you can look it up. Last Day Events, Pastor Philip Mills, he's back there somewhere. He shared it with me yesterday. Last Day Events, page 95, it actually tells us that the events of Revelation chapter 11, talking about the French Revolution, will be repeated in our cities. The French Revolution will occur again. And somehow it has to do with wealth inequality married together with this radical atheistic ideology that formed the basis of the French Revolution, and later on was the breeding ground for Marxism and the ideologies that flow from that. Manuscript releases Volume 5, page 305, also says this: in India, China, Russia, and the cities of America, thousands of men and women are dying of starvation. The moneyed men, because they have the power, control the market. So there's some market manipulation also going on from the big players in the economy. They purchase at low rates all they can, and then sell at greatly increased prices. So there's inflation again, the increase of prices. This means starvation to the poorer classes and result in a civil war. There will be a time of trouble, such as never was, since there was a nation, and at that time shall Michael stand up. So all of these things, what we're seeing, the unrest in society, the class warfare, this radical ideology that somehow fuels this type of civil war behavior with the inflation in the marketplace, what does it lead to? It leads further to the impetus for some global authority to clamp down and to bring peace and prosperity and safety and order again. So let's summarize what we've talked about. Natural disasters, high rates of inflation, and economic and societal instability will form the pretext for the kings and merchants of the earth to pursue means of enforcing order. These secular powers will seek to accomplish this through a global coalition with each other and a union with the religious power of Babylon. This is the fornication that we read about in Revelation chapter 18. Eventually, this power will turn to enacting religious legislation. And what begins as a national Sunday law in the United States will become a universal Sunday law around the world, which will include coordinated economic sanctions on God's people. This act may appear to bring about peace and safety for a time, but it causes Babylon's sins to reach unto heaven, triggering God's judgments in the 7 last plagues. Some level of economic activity will continue through it all, but Babylon and the wealth it helped generate for the kings and merchants of the earth will be destroyed in God's final judgments. And the final economic collapse will occur at that time.
Now, some people I really want to encourage you guys to follow is George Gammon. George is a student of the monetary system. He's also done tremendous work with Chris McIntosh and others in exposing and shining a light on the World Economic Forum's real plan and the global elite's real plan. George has done tremendous work there, and so too Chris McIntosh. Also Gerald Celente. I think it's important people follow Gerald at the moment. He has made some very accurate predictions over a long time. I think Doug Casey is someone who sees what's going on and understands what's going on, and he makes tremendous amount of sense right now. And so I definitely recommend you guys, if you're not following them, definitely do so. So how do we prepare for these chaotic times ahead? Well, I did this video, Financial Chaos, Buy Gold and Silver, and I do think that's a part of the play. For me, what I'm doing, as I said in my video last week, I'm now looking at buying farmland. Now, I've got investments in farmland and soft commodities and hard commodities and real assets, but I'm actually planning now in moving out of the city, out of the suburbs, onto some farmland. Last week I looked at some properties up in the mountain area, which was quite nice. And my background, as I said last week, I come from a farm. I grew up on a farm, and so that's a lifestyle that I'm looking at heading back to. So I think for me, it's investing in some farmland, being able to feed myself and be self-sustaining. I think it is getting out of the financial system, so having real assets that hold its purchasing power, things that you'll be able to use to trade for basic goods and services. And for me, that analog physical gold and silver is an important part there. But, you know, these are just my opinions. This is just how I see things. I'm, you know, there's no certainties in life. There's only possibilities and probabilities. And as I just put the pieces of the puzzle together, I just keep coming back to this. And, you know, maybe I'm completely way off and have no idea what I'm talking about. But when I use my brain and look at the way the world is moving, it seems quite obvious to me. And so I'm preparing. What about you guys? What do you think? Do you think I've completely lost my mind? Or, you know, are you guys seeing the same things? Are you seeing the same kind of market manipulation and corporatism, globalism, the movement towards Marxism and fascism, inflation, wealth inequality, climate change, climate crisis, global warming, whatever they want to call it? I don't know. What do you guys think? I mean, I do know. This is just my opinion. When I say I don't know, I just shake my head. But anyway, guys, if you like this video, give us that like, hit that thumbs up, and leave a comment below. Love to see your thoughts and opinions. I always try to get back to most of yous. I really do enjoy engaging in conversations with you guys. Some of the comments are brilliant. I really, honestly do appreciate it. Anyway, take care, and I'll see you again on another episode of Finance Uncut.